Wren Thompson was running late, and she never ran late. Not for board meetings, not for charity galas, and certainly not for something as simple as grabbing coffee. But today, of all days, she had chosen to ditch her usual driver and walk to the cafe, hoping for a rare moment of normalcy. It had been years since she had done something as mundane as standing in line for her own coffee, and she had foolishly romanticized the idea. Now she was regretting it. She had stepped away for barely 30 seconds to take a call one she shouldn't have answered, and when she turned back, she expected to have lost her spot in the long, winding line. But instead, a tall man with broad shoulders and a little girl perched on his hip was standing exactly where she had been, holding the space as if he had been there all along. "Excuse me," Wren said, stepping forward hesitantly. "Were you saving my spot?" The man turned toward her, his blue eyes meeting hers with something between curiosity and amusement. "Yes, you looked like you were coming back, so I figured I'd hold it for you." Wren blinked, not used to strangers doing things like that for her. "Thank you," she said, genuinely surprised. "No problem," he replied smoothly. Then, nodding toward the little girl in his arms, he added, "We've been people watching while we wait. Say hi, Lily." The little girl, no older than 4, shot Wren a shy smile and waved. "Hi, Lily," Wren greeted warmly. "This is Wren," the man told his daughter. Then, turning back to Wren, he extended his hand. "Harrison Nash." She shook it, still slightly thrown by the entire interaction. "Nice to meet you, Harrison." He nodded, shifting Lily's weight in his arms. "You don't look like the kind of person who has time to waste in long lines." She let out a quiet laugh. If only he knew. "I don't, usually, but I thought I'd try something different today." Harrison grinned. "And how's that working out for you?" "Well, so far I've been saved a spot in line by a stranger, so not bad." Lily tugged at her father's collar, whispering something in his ear. Harrison chuckled, looking down at her. "She wants to know if you like chocolate croissants." Wren smiled. "I do." Lily beamed. "Daddy always gets me one." Harrison smirked. "And here I thought I was being subtle about bribing you into behaving." The three of them moved forward in line, and Wren found herself enjoying the conversation more than she had expected. Harrison was easy to talk to, and Lily was an absolute delight. "So what do you do?" he asked as they neared the counter. Wren hesitated. People tended to treat her differently when they found out who she was. "I'll work in business." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." She chuckled. "It's complicated." "Well, I'm a firefighter," he offered, as if to balance out her non-answer. "A firefighter," she repeated, genuinely impressed. "Yep, and full-time single dad." He ruffled Lily's hair affectionately. "Which is the real job?" Wren's heart softened. There was something incredibly endearing about the way he looked at his daughter, like she was his entire world. It was rare to see that kind of devotion so openly displayed. They reached the counter, and Wren started to pull out her wallet, but before she could, Harrison had already handed over his card. "Hey," she protested, "you don't have to do that." "I know," he said simply. "But I should at least pay for mine." Harrison shrugged. "Consider it a thank you for keeping us entertained in line." She stared at him, trying to remember the last time someone had done something nice for her without expecting anything in return. It had been a long time. "Well, thank you," she said, genuinely touched. "My pleasure," he said. Then, balancing Lily on one arm while grabbing their order with the other, he smiled at Wren. "See you around, Wren." And just like that, he was gone. Wren stood there for a long moment, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Intrigue. She had no idea who Harrison Nash really was, but one thing was certain: she wanted to find out. Wren hadn't expected to see Harrison again. A casual conversation in a coffee shop was hardly the foundation for a lasting connection. And yet, she found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit. There was something about the way he had carried himself, steady, confident, completely unaffected by the chaotic world around him, that lingered in her thoughts far longer than it should have. So, when she ran into him again just 3 days later, it took her a full second to believe he was actually standing in front of her. She had been walking through the park, a rare pocket of time between meetings allowing her a moment of quiet, when she spotted him near the playground. He was kneeling beside Lily, tying the laces of her tiny sneakers, while she chattered animatedly about something he was clearly listening to with full attention. The sight of them, so natural, so effortlessly connected, made something warm settle in Wren's chest. Lily was the first to notice her. "Wren," she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement as she waved enthusiastically. Harrison glanced up, surprise flickering across his face before it softened into something close to amusement. "Well, look who it is," he said, standing up. "Businesswoman on a park stroll, didn't see that coming." Wren crossed her arms. "And I didn't take you for the type to lurk in coffee shop lines saving spots for strangers, but here we are." Lily giggled, grabbing Wren's hand as if they were old friends. "Are you here to play too?" "I wish," Wren answered, charmed by the little girl's enthusiasm. "But I don't think I'm properly dressed for climbing monkey bars." Harrison surveyed her tailored blazer and sleek heels with a knowing look. "Yes, I'd pay good money to see that." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you'd pay." He shrugged. "Some things are worth the price." The air between them shifted, subtle, but undeniable. It was the kind of moment Wren hadn't experienced in years, the kind where time slowed just enough to make her wonder what would happen if she leaned into it. But before she could dwell on it, Lily tugged at her father's arm. "Can we get ice cream?" Harrison glanced at the time on his watch. "It's not exactly." "Ice cream sounds like a great idea," Wren interrupted, shooting him a pointed look. He exhaled dramatically. "I see how it is, you're teaming up with her now." Lily grinned. "She's smart." He shook his head, but there was no real protest in his expression. "All right, ice cream it is." The three of them walked toward the small stand near the park entrance, Lily skipping between them as she debated flavors with the seriousness of a high-stakes decision. "You know," Harrison said as they waited in line, "I still don't know what you actually do." Wren considered dodging the question again, but something about him made her want to be a little more honest. "I run a company," she admitted, "multiple actually." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Impressive." She tilted her head. "You're not going to ask for details." "Nah," he said. "If you want to tell me, you will. If not, I'll just assume you're secretly a spy." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're oddly good at not prying." He handed Lily her cone before meeting Wren's gaze. "I figure people tell you what they want you to know. No need to push." It was such a simple statement, but it struck her harder than she expected. She was used to people digging, wanting more, always looking for an angle. But Harrison, he just let her be. They took a seat at a bench, Lily happily licking her ice cream while swinging her legs back and forth. "So, firefighter and full-time dad," Wren mused, leaning back. "That's got to be a challenge." He exhaled, nodding. "It has its moments, but she's worth every second of it." Lily, as if sensing she was the topic of conversation, looked up with a bright smile. "Daddy's the best." Harrison ruffled her hair. "You just like me because I buy you ice cream." She grinned, "And because you give the best hugs." Wren watched them, something deep in her chest tightening. She had spent so much of her life surrounded by people who valued power, ambition, and wealth above all else. But here was a man whose entire world revolved around love, pure, uncomplicated love for his daughter. and it was the most genuine thing she had seen in a long time. "You're staring," Harrison teased, breaking the moment. Wren blinked, caught off guard. "I was just thinking." "Dangerous habit." She smirked, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "You say that like it's a bad thing." Lily finished her ice cream, wiping her hands on a napkin before hopping off the bench. "Can I go play more?" Harrison nodded. "Stay where it can see you." She ran off toward the playground, leaving them alone in comfortable silence. "So," Harrison said after a beat, "are you ever going to tell me why someone like you was standing in line for coffee instead of having it hand-delivered?" Wren exhaled, glancing at him. "I wanted to feel normal for a little while." His expression shifted, understanding, but not pitying. "And did it work?" She thought about it, about the coffee shop, about this moment, about him. "Yeah," she admitted, "I think it did." Harrison leaned back, a small smile playing at his lips. "Then, I guess it's a good thing I saved your spot." And for the first time in a long time, Wren felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Wren hadn't expected her life to shift so quickly, but then again, she hadn't expected Harrison Nash. She had spent years building walls, crafting a life that was structured, controlled a fortress against the chaos of emotions. Yet, somehow, in a matter of weeks, Harrison and Lily had slipped through the cracks, settling into her world like they had always belonged there. It started with small things: an impromptu coffee run turning into a morning ritual, a casual text about an art exhibit becoming an unspoken invitation, evenings where she found herself at the park again, watching Lily conquer the jungle gym while Harrison stood beside her, his presence steady, unwavering. And then, there were the nights she caught herself staring at her phone, debating whether to message him first. Tonight, however, there was no hesitation. Wren stood outside the modest firehouse, shifting her weight from one foot to the other as she debated whether this was the worst idea she'd ever had. She had never spontaneously shown up anywhere for someone before, much less a man who had no idea she was coming. Yet here she was. The door swung open before she could overthink it any further. Harrison stood there, his dark blue uniform slightly rumpled, his expression caught between surprise and amusement. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Wren exhaled, suddenly feeling more self-conscious than she had in years. "I was in the neighborhood." His lips twitched. Because people just happened to be in the neighborhood of a firehouse at 9 at night. She crossed her arms. "Are you always this difficult?" He stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. "Only when I'm caught off guard." The inside of the firehouse was quieter than she expected. A few voices echoed from another room, but for the most part, it felt calm, lived in. The scent of coffee lingered in the air, mixing with something slightly smoky. Harrison led her toward a small lounge area, grabbing 2 bottles of water from a nearby fridge before handing her one. "So," he said, settling into a chair across from her, "tell me the real reason you're here." Wren hesitated. She wasn't even sure she had a concrete answer. "I just wanted to see you," she admitted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Harrison studied her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "Rough night." She let out a soft laugh. "You could say that." He didn't press, didn't ask for details she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he leaned back, stretching his legs out casually. "Well, lucky for you, I happen to be an expert at distracting people from rough nights." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, what's your method?" He grinned. "Bad jokes, questionable cooking skills, and if all else fails, a riveting tour of firehouse life." She tilted her head. "I think I'll pass on the questionable cooking." "Smart choice," he admitted, "but the jokes are non-negotiable." Despite herself, Wren felt the tension easing from her shoulders. Harrison had that effect on her. They sat in easy conversation, the quiet hum of the firehouse settling around them. He told her about the odd calls they got the cat that had somehow ended up in a ventilation shaft, the elderly man who called them weekly just for company. She found herself laughing more than she had in months. Then, somewhere between stories and stolen glances, Harrison's expression shifted. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "I don't know much about your world, but I do know when someone's carrying too much on their shoulders." Wren's fingers tightened around her water bottle. "I'm fine." Harrison didn't look convinced. "Maybe, but you don't have to be." She looked away, staring at the worn wooden table between them. "I'm not used to letting people in." "I figured," he leaned forward slightly, "but I'm not most people." Something in his voice made her look up. There it was again, that steady certainty, the kind that made her feel like the world wasn't spinning so fast. And for the first time in a long time, she wanted to believe him. The sound of a distant alarm cut through the moment. Harrison sighed, standing. "That's my cue." Wren rose as well, suddenly reluctant to leave. "Be safe." He shot her a quick grin. "Always." And then he was gone, disappearing into the rush of movement as the firehouse sprang to life. Wren stood there for a beat, letting everything settle. Then, with a deep breath, she turned and walked out into the night, the weight on her chest just a little lighter than before. Wren had never been a woman who second-guessed herself. Every decision she made was calculated, deliberate. Yet, as she stood in front of Harrison's modest townhouse with a bouquet of wildflowers in hand, a ridiculous impulse she couldn't fully explain, she hesitated. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of something she wasn't sure how to name. It wasn't just attraction, though that was undeniable. It was the way Harrison made her feel like she could breathe, like she wasn't constantly balancing 10 different crises in her mind. It was how Lily's laughter had become a sound she looked forward to, how their casual moments together felt more real than any extravagant gala she had ever attended. She had spent her life surrounded by power, by people who measured worth in numbers and influence. But Harrison, he measured life in moments, small, beautiful, fleeting moments that somehow meant everything. The door swung open before she could knock. Lily stood there, her face lighting up instantly. "You're here." Wren smiled, the last of her hesitation fading. "I am." Lily's eyes landed on the bouquet. "Are those for Daddy?" A laugh bubbled up before Wren could stop it. "I suppose they are." Lily grabbed her hand and pulled her inside without hesitation. "He's in the kitchen." Wren barely had time to register the warmth of the house before she was being ushered through the hallway and into the heart of the home. Harrison was at the stove, stirring something in a pan, his back turned to them. "She brought you flowers," Lily announced with the kind of excitement usually reserved for birthdays. Harrison turned, his brows lifting in surprise as his gaze landed on Wren and the bouquet in her hands. "Well, that's a first." "I figured firefighters don't get enough flowers," Wren said, stepping forward to place them on the counter. His lips curved into something warm, something that made her stomach flip in a way she wasn't prepared for. "I think you might be right." Lily clambered onto a chair, swinging her legs beneath her. "Are you staying for dinner?" Wren hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not," Harrison interrupted before she could finish the thought. "Stay." That single word settled something inside her. She took a seat beside Lily, watching as Harrison moved through the kitchen with practiced ease. There was something intimate about it, something grounding. She was used to meals served under chandeliers, courses planned by Michelin-starred chefs. But this? A simple home-cooked dinner in a kitchen filled with warmth and laughter. This felt like something she hadn't even realized she wanted. As they ate, Lily launched into a story about school, her animated recounting filled with dramatic hand gestures that had Harrison shaking his head fondly. Wren listened, utterly charmed by the way father and daughter interacted so effortless, so full of love. It wasn't until Lily yawned mid-sentence that Harrison stood, ruffling her hair. "All right, kiddo, bedtime." Lily pouted, "But—" "No buts," he said, lifting her with ease. "Say good night." Lily wrapped her small arms around Wren without hesitation. "Night, Wren." Something in Wren's chest tightened as she hugged the little girl back. "Good night, Lily." Harrison carried her upstairs, leaving Wren alone in the kitchen. She glanced around, taking in the small details, the slightly crooked picture frames, the stack of books on the counter, the faint scent of something warm and familiar in the air. This wasn't just a house, it was a home. When Harrison returned, he found her rinsing dishes in the sink. "You really don't have to do that." She glanced over her shoulder. "You cooked, it's only fair." He leaned against the doorway, watching her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "You're full of surprises, Wren." She turned off the water, drying her hands before facing him fully. "So are you." A beat of silence stretched between them, heavy with something unspoken. Then Harrison stepped forward, closing the space between them. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I wasn't expecting to come," she admitted, "but I wanted to." His gaze searched hers, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "You scare me a little, you know that." That caught her off guard. "I do." He nodded. "Because you make me want things I stopped letting myself want a long time ago." Her breath hitched. "Like what?" His fingers brushed against hers, tentative testing. "Like this." And then he kissed her. It wasn't hurried or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing the feel of her, like he was grounding himself in the moment. Wren had been kissed before, but never like this. Never in a way that made the world feel smaller, quieter. Never in a way that made her think, "This is where I'm supposed to be." When they finally pulled apart, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "What are we doing, Wren?" She exhaled, her fingers tightening around his. "Something that feels a lot like falling." He let out a quiet laugh. "Yeah, it does." Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. And for the first time in her life, Wren didn't feel the need to have all the answers. Because in this moment, in this tiny kitchen filled with warmth and quiet certainty, she already had everything she needed. Harrison had never been the type to dwell on things. His life, between firefighting and raising Lily, didn't allow for much time to sit around and overthink. But ever since Wren had walked into his world, first in a coffee shop, then in the park, then in his kitchen, he found himself thinking about her at the oddest moments. Like now. He was at the station, finishing up a routine check on the equipment, when his coworker, Mike, nudged him. "You've been staring at that wrench for 5 minutes," Mike said, leaning against the truck. "Something on your mind." Harrison set the tool down, shaking his head. "Just thinking." Mike raised an eyebrow. "That's a first." Harrison rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Instead, he tossed his gloves onto the workbench and exhaled. "You ever meet someone who just throws you off balance?" Mike let out a low whistle. "Ah, so that's what this is about." Harrison didn't confirm or deny it, but Mike didn't seem to need him to. "All right, let's hear it. Who's the woman messing with your head?" Harrison hesitated, then ran a hand over his jaw. "Wren." Mike frowned, like Wren Thompson. Harrison glanced at him sharply. "You know her." Mike let out a short laugh. "You're kidding, right? Everyone knows Wren Thompson. She's one of the biggest names in business. Owns half the city." Harrison went completely still. Mike's expression shifted as realization set in. "Wait, you didn't know?" Harrison's mind raced, piecing together every moment he had spent with Wren. She had said she ran a company. Multiple, actually. He had assumed it meant she was successful, but this. He scrubbed a hand over his face. No, I didn't. Mike whistled again. Man, you've been dating a woman who probably has her own private jet, and you didn't even know it. Harrison didn't answer. Not because he was embarrassed, but because the realization hit him differently than he expected. It didn't change anything. Wren was still the woman who had laughed at his bad jokes, who had sat in his kitchen helping Lily with her coloring book, who had looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. But it did raise a question: why hadn't she told him? Wren was at her office, reviewing a contract, when her assistant, Lillian, stepped in with a cautious expression. "There's someone here to see you," Lillian said hesitantly. "He doesn't have an appointment, but I think you'll want to make time for him." Wren looked up curious. "Who is it?" Lillian glanced toward the door. "Harrison Nash." Wren's heart skipped a beat. She stood quickly, smoothing down her blouse before nodding. "Send him in." A moment later, Harrison stepped into her office. Gone was the easygoing firefighter she had kissed in his kitchen. There was no anger in his expression, but there was something else, something guarded. She gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing. "You're Wren Thompson," he said, the words not an accusation, but not quite neutral either. She exhaled, setting her pen down. "I was going to tell you." Harrison studied her. "When?" She looked away for a brief second before meeting his gaze again. "I don't know." He crossed his arms. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Wren hesitated, because I didn't want it to change things. Harrison let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You thought me knowing who you are would change how I see you." She stood, stepping around the desk. "It always does. People treat me differently when they find out. They assume things, expect things. I didn't want that with you." Harrison took a deep breath. "Wren, I don't care how much money you have. That's not what this is about." Her stomach tightened. "Then what is it about?" He hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair. "Trust." The word landed heavily between them. "I don't care that you're successful," Harrison continued. "Care that you didn't trust me enough to tell me. Care that you thought I'd see you differently." Wren swallowed. "I wasn't trying to keep it from you. I was just scared." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Of what?" She took a shaky breath. "Of losing this, of losing you." Harrison exhaled slowly, his arms dropping to his sides. "Wren." The door suddenly burst open, and Lily ran in, her face lighting up at the sight of Wren. "Daddy said we could get lunch after his meeting," she announced, completely unaware of the tension in the room. Wren's heart clenched. Harrison glanced down at his daughter, then back at Wren. His expression shifted, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. Then he exhaled and reached for Lily's hand. "Come on, kiddo," he said gently. "Let's give Wren some time to work." Lily pouted, "But I wanted to." "We'll see her soon," Harrison promised. Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Wren watched as Harrison led his daughter out of the room. Just before he stepped through the door, he looked back. "We're not done," he said quietly. Then he was gone. And for the first time in years, Wren had no idea how to fix what was broken. Wren had built an empire with precision, control, and unwavering confidence. Yet, as she stood outside Harrison's townhouse, uncertainty coiled in her stomach like an unfamiliar intruder. She had spent days replaying their last conversation, trying to decipher the exact moment she had let fear dictate her choices. She hadn't meant to keep the truth from him, not really. But deep down, she had been terrified that once he knew the full extent of her world, he'd decide he didn't want to be part of it. And now, she had to face the consequences of that fear. She knocked, and when the door opened, Harrison stood there, his expression unreadable. The easy warmth she had grown used to seeing in his eyes was absent, replaced by something more guarded. "I was hoping you'd come," he admitted, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated for only a second before crossing the threshold. The house smelled like cinnamon, probably from something Lily had convinced him to bake. The familiarity of it steadied her, reminding her why she had come. Harrison leaned against the counter, arms crossed, waiting. "I should have told you the truth sooner," Wren said, keeping her voice steady. "I should have trusted you." His gaze didn't waver. "Then why didn't you?" She exhaled, forcing herself to be honest. "Because I've spent my life surrounded by people who only see my name, my wealth, my status. I didn't want that with you. I didn't want to watch your expression change when you realized just how much of my world is built on power and expectation." He studied her, his jaw tightening slightly. "You care about any of that?" "No," she admitted, but didn't want to risk finding out otherwise. Harrison ran a hand through his hair, letting out a slow breath. "You don't get it, do you?" She frowned. "Get what?" He pushed off the counter, closing the space between them. "It was never about the money, Wren. It was about the fact that you didn't trust me enough to let me in. You keep this impossible standard for yourself, like you have to control every part of your life, like you can't let people see the cracks. But I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be real with me." Her chest tightened, and if real means admitting I was scared. His expression softened slightly. "Then we start there." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. Then, finally, Wren reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I don't want to run from this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to run from you." Harrison's thumb brushed over her knuckles, his touch steady. "Then don't." She swallowed hard. "What if don't know how?" His lips curved into something faint, something gentle. "Then we figure it out together." Relief flooded her so quickly it nearly stole her breath. She had expected resistance, distance, but instead, he was offering her a chance to make things right. And she wasn't going to waste it. Weeks passed, and with them came a shift Wren hadn't anticipated. For the first time in her life, she wasn't navigating a relationship built on expectation or obligation. With Harrison, things were different. Simpler. She spent evenings at his house, curled up on the couch with Lily asleep against her shoulder while Harrison sipped coffee beside her. She found herself laughing more, worrying less. And when she finally took Harrison to one of her charity events, she braced for the scrutiny of high society. But he handled it effortlessly, standing beside her with the same quiet confidence he carried everywhere he went. Afterwards, as they walked along the quiet city street, he glanced at her. "So, was that as bad as you thought it would be?" She let out a breath. "Not even close." He smirked. "Told you." She playfully nudged his arm. "You're insufferable." He caught her hand, pulling her to a stop. "And yet, you're still here." She looked up at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "Yeah, I am." His eyes searched hers, something unreadable flickering in their depths. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Wren's breath caught. "I was going to wait," Harrison admitted, flipping it open to reveal a simple but stunning diamond ring. "But then, I realized that waiting is pointless when I already know what I want." She stared at him, stunned. "Harrison." "I love you, Wren," he said, voice steady. "I love you in a way that has nothing to do with your name, your wealth, or your world. I love you because you challenge me, because you make me want more, because you walked into my life and refused to leave even when it got complicated. And I don't want to waste another second pretending like I don't already know where this is going. So, marry me." Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. She had spent years believing love was something that came with terms, conditions, But Harrison had never asked for anything except the truth. He had never wanted anything but her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then, without another word, he kissed her slow and deep, the kind of kiss that felt like forever. The wedding was small, intimate. Lily stood between them as they exchanged vows, beaming as if she had orchestrated the entire thing herself. And as Wren looked into Harrison's eyes, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't standing at the top of an empire built on power and control. She was standing at the beginning of something real, something lasting. And it was more than enough.